right, so if you're buying a home in Chicago in 2024, you need to watch this video. So it's going to be absolutely critical if you're thinking about making offers in a competitive real estate market that we find ourselves in here in 2024. So today's video, we're gonna be talking about how to put together the most competitive offer so that you can win out in multiple offer situations and get the home of your dreams. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Jordan Pilot and I'm your go-to Chicago real estate agent. My team and I have been servicing the city of Chicago for the last 10 years, and we'd be absolutely honored to help you achieve your real estate goals. So if you have any questions about moving to Chicago or perhaps even moving around in Chicago, feel free to just text the number on the screen and a team member or myself will get in touch within 24 hours. Additionally, if this has been valuable to you today, please do us a favor, like the video, comment any additional questions you have down below, subscribe, turn on your notifications so you can catch all of our future videos. All right, let's get into it. All right, so as I mentioned, if you're making offers in the Chicago real estate market here in Chicago, specifically on like the north side of the city and some of the neighborhoods that I've talked about a lot in the past on this channel, neighborhoods such as Old Town, Lincoln Park, Lakeview, Logan Square, Wicker Park, Bucktown, just to name a few, well, you're gonna be probably in a pretty competitive environment when you're making offers. So meaning the main constraint in the market right now just still continues to be a lack of inventory. So with the lack of inventory and with interest rates starting to come down from their peaks back in 2023, we are now starting to see a flood of buyers in the market, on top of the fact that Chicago is a very seasonal market, right? So the unofficial start to the spring market is typically right after the Super Bowl, which was about mid-February. And the spring market, or the bulk of like the busy season of the year, runs from about mid-February through about June, maybe even through May. So if you're making an offer on a home in one of these neighborhoods in the spring market, well, just know you're signing up to be in a competitive market. And that does not mean that you're not going to get the home of your dreams, but we just have to be a little bit more crafty, have a little bit more finesse, and really make sure we're thinking about all the different elements that we can combine into our offer so that it stands out in the eyes of a seller. Because at the end of the day, your offer has no personality, it has no emotion, so all we can do is build rapport with the listing agent, which is something I feel I do really well and is a huge value add to my clients. But we also need to make sure that we're pulling on the different levers of the contract and not just focusing on purchase price to make our contract and our offer seem like the most competitive and most ideal. So what I want to do in this video is just highlight a few of the different levers and the terms of the contract that we can manipulate and that we can strategize on so that we can put forward the best offer and hopefully win you the property that you're looking for. So first up is actually the purchase price. Even though I said it's not the only thing, purchase price is important. So if you're thinking about coming in on a property that is new to the market in 2024 in one of these areas, well, just know you're probably going to be having to pay at least full ask, if not going up and above over asking price. And so really throughout the process of the showing and my reach out to the agent, both before the showing, during the showing, and after, really understanding what's important to the seller, as it relates to purchase price. And most agents in today's market are actually pricing properties either right at fair market value or even slightly under, because we know that the demand and supply effect, with demand far outpacing supply, is going to drive prices up to whatever the actual market value is for that home. And it doesn't mean necessarily that it's the fair market value, but it's the price that you're going to have to pay in order to get the home that you like. Because typically if a property is priced well, it's priced aggressively, like I'm saying, either right at fair market value or slightly under. If it's in a good location and the condition is move-in ready, well, there's going to be 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6, or in some cases 25 other buyers that also want that same home. So making sure you're coming in with your best foot forward from a purchase price standpoint, and you're going to really want to lean on your agent, aka myself, to help you understand, okay, what is fair market value? And based on kind of the different dynamics and the competition and the traffic that's coming in and out of that listing, where are we going to actually need the offer to be? And acknowledging the fact that even though fair market value, let's just say, is $600,000, well, we may need to write an offer around $625,000 in order to actually get the property. And so that doesn't necessarily mean you're drastically overpaying. It could just mean that the listing agent, is pricing that property slightly low in order to attract the maximum amount of people through the property and be able to drive the price up with multiple offers and to be able to get the best terms for their seller. All right, the second term on the contract is your earnest money. So your earnest money is basically just a good faith deposit that says, hey, with our accepted offer, we're going to give you a certain amount of money up front that you're going to hold in a non-interest bearing account, typically with the listing agent's brokerage, just so it's like skin in the game. So usually this amount in a non-competitive market is about $1,000, and then that increases to about 5% of the purchase price after you get through the inspection period, you get through attorney review, and you hash out all the different things that may come up in your due diligence period. However, in a competitive market, Usually I recommend increasing your initial earnest money to either $5,000 or $10,000 just to show more good faith and to show more skin in the game so that the seller knows that you mean business and that you're going to actually want to proceed and move forward with that contract. Now, the good thing is here, because a lot of people get concerned and they say, hey, Jordan, well, is the earnest money additional on top of the down payment, on top of the closing costs? And it's not. It's just part of your overall cash to close. All right, so before wrapping up earnest money, it is a crazy spring market. So I'm in the office today. There's a lot of people here. So I had to move into a different office to finish this video. But I think you get the point with earnest money. Basically, you're just wanting to increase your good faith with the seller, and that money will ultimately just be reduced from your cash to close. So don't worry about the extra 5% you're putting up front. And also, it's very protected by the different contingencies in the contract. So if anything were to happen, through the inspection period, with an appraisal, things like that, that money is protected and that money will be refunded to you should we need to terminate the contract. All right, so next up, we're talking about the closing date, and this is a really important one. And so as we're going through the process, like the others, asking questions, what's important to your seller? What is their timeline? They're typically going to tell us what they need, right? Some people are just wanting to close as soon as possible. Some people are looking for an extended closing date. And some people want some sort of combination, which I'm often finding in today's market, which leads to what we call a fast close and a leaseback, or AKA a post-close possession. So understanding what is important to the seller, because for example, if they're going to be buying a home on the other end, likely the way that we want to structure our offer, as long as you have flexibility in your timeline, which is also a great thing to have if is possible, and it's not always the case, but if you do have flexibility, then typically I like to say, hey, let's push forward a fast close, either a 3 or 4 week closing, so that the seller can get their cash out of that property, so then they can go and make an offer on a different property, non-contingent on the sale of their home. This is really attractive for sellers because now they're not having to basically go and make a contingent offer on a new home and have the risk of something happening with the current home, which then kills both deals, because if one domino falls, the other one falls right behind it. And so offering a fast close and then saying something along the lines of, we'll have a 30-day close, and then we're also going to give you 30 to 45 to 60 days. Typically, it's not longer than about 60 days, where you can actually rent back the home or lease back the home from us so that we can basically allow you to stay in the home so that you have a more smooth transition. Also having the ability for you to make a non-contingent offer on your next property. So this is something that I find sometimes you are able to actually receive rent from the seller as you close on that property in 30 days. But in a really competitive market, a lot of times we offer that they can lease back from you for free for that 30 to 60 days. And the good thing about this is that when you close on a home, you're actually paying your mortgage in arrears, versus when you're renting a property, you're paying your rent at the start of the month for the month that's getting ready to occur. And so what happens, just for example, if you were to close anytime in April, then you're gonna prorate your interest over the remaining days of April at the closing. You're gonna skip the month of May, and then your first full mortgage payment is gonna be due June 1st. So this oftentimes will buy you that extra 30 to 45 days where you're actually closed on the home, but you're not yet living in there, where you're not gonna have two different payments, whether it be a rent payment and a mortgage payment at the same time. So this is a strategic aspect that we can incorporate into our offer in terms of closing dates. So that was kind of 3 and 4. So number 5 on the list is an as-is clause. So an as-is clause here in Chicago basically means that you are assuming that you are just gonna take the property as it exists, as long as there are no material defects or health and safety issues. Even though, the only real focus of the inspection, even in a non-as-is sale, is only to focus on material defective items or health and safety issues. If these items come up in the inspection of the property, we have the ability to negotiate. And if for some reason we can't come to terms on negotiation on inspection items, that is one of those contingencies in the contract where you can actually back out of the deal, get your earnest money back. And typically the only cost that is sunk at this point is going to be the cost of your inspection. And even with an as-is sale, if those material defects pop up, let's just say, for example, you get into the property and the oven doesn't work, or maybe the furnace doesn't work, or something along those lines, those are still considered material defects, and you can still negotiate on those even though you have the as-is clause in the contract. And so what I find is that the as-is pretty much a no-brainer. It leads to a cleaner deal in the eyes of the seller, because it's essentially a handshake agreement saying, hey, once we get under contract, we acknowledge that some things are going to be needing to get done in the property, but as long as there's nothing material defective or health and safety, bigger ticket items, then we're going to take the property and not nickel and dime the seller over inspection credits once we get to that point in the process. Next up on the list, number 6, is the tax reproration agreement. And so essentially how this works, I'm not going to get into any crazy details here, but essentially you are going to be getting a credit of the amount of time for your tax bill from the time that the current owner in that specific tax year was occupying that property before you actually purchased it, because taxes in Chicago are paid in arrears. And so typically we incorporate something like 105%, 110%, maybe even sometimes 115% in reassessment years in order for you to buff up the proration of the actual tax bill that's going to occur after you move in. Because if you buy a home in 2023, you're actually not paying the 2023 taxes until 2024. And so typically over time, taxes go up between 5, 10, sometimes 15% year over year. And so making sure that you are incorporating some sort of buffer there is often important in the eyes of the buyer. However, as it pertains to this situation, what I like to typically do is say TBD AI, which basically means to be determined during attorney review. And by doing this, the attorneys can work together to come up with the most precise number that they feel based on their algorithm and just some different multipliers and things like that they use to crunch numbers in terms of the taxes. We can arrive on a number that is the most fair for the buyers and the sellers. And I find that the TBD AI is often the best way to approach the tax reproration agreement section of the contract. All right, and the last two for this one is your appraisal gap waiver and then your appraisal contingency being waived in general. And so the last one, it's the last stop. Really waiving the appraisal in general is a very risky thing to do. For some people it makes sense, for some it doesn't. But one way that we get around this and one way that we offer a little bit more certainty to the seller during the actual closing process and the appraisal process is to offer a gap waiver. By offering a gap waiver, what typically happens, because as we stated before earlier in the video, a lot of times even though fair market value, let's just say is 600,000, this property may actually trade and go under contract at 625. And so just because appraisers and appraisals in general are kind of hit or miss, sometimes they come back at contract value, which most do in today's market because the appraisers know that it's competitive, they know there's not a lot of inventory. But in the case that property, let's just say we're under contract at 625, the appraisal comes back and says, hey, the property's only worth 600,000. What we can do, because typically if that were to happen, the seller will normally come down to match the appraised value of the contract, because your lender, if you're getting financing, is not going to give you a loan on 625 if the property is only appraised at 600,000. So it's really one of three things can happen. Either the buyer comes up with the additional cash, which we'll get to in a second, the seller comes down that $25,000 to match the appraised value, or there's something in between that we work out between both parties, whether it be bridging the gap halfway with the seller coming down half and then the buyer coming up with some additional funds. But the appraisal gap waiver, I just had one the other day for a property that was kind of in that price point that we're talking about. And what we did is we said, hey, we understand that we're going under contract at $615,000. However, the property might only be worth $600,000, but for a lot of different factors, my clients were still okay overpaying for this property if it meant them getting the property that they could move into, close on, and start building their family. And so I always say that there's value outside of price alone, and there's value in lifestyle. So there's value in getting the right location. There's value in getting the property that you can see yourself building a family in or growing your business in, or whatever your different life events that may happen. A lot of times people are willing to pay that opportunity cost of paying a little bit more for the property to get the right property, even though it may cost them a little bit more. But when you really think about your 30-year fixed mortgage, which is what most people are taking out, an additional $25,000 or even $50,000, yes, it makes a difference. However, that difference is less significant than not getting a home at all because you're so rigid and stuck on not overpaying for the property. And so the appraisal gap waiver, to make our way back to that, is essentially saying, hey, we're under contract at $615,000, but we know there might be a little bit of a concern from the seller of that $15,000 between $600 and $615, because we know that maybe some properties in the area close closer to $6. So if that happens, we want to make sure that the seller knows they're not going to have to come down on price to match the appraised value and to cover that difference of $15,000. So what we say is we are actually going to offer you an appraisal gap waiver of up to $15,000 over the appraised value. So for example, that property again is at $615,000, appraisal comes in at $600. We're saying, hey, we're gonna bridge the gap and pay cash for that additional $15,000, so the seller is not coming down and having to renegotiate the contract after it's almost to the closing table. So this is really attractive. It's a little bit risky because typically you have to do one of two things. Either you come up with additional cash, and if you have the ability to do so, then that is one option. But sometimes you just have to manipulate your loan to value. So let's just say you're putting 20% down. Well, maybe now you have to put 18 or 17% down and then basically rework that number so that your cash to close is still the same, but your loan to value is slightly different so that you can bridge that $15,000 gap. And then lastly, worst case scenario, sometimes you're gonna have this, and that same deal I'm talking about, we were competing with a cash offer. So they basically came back to us and we did all the things I just mentioned. And some contracts, you pick and choose some of these different things and you incorporate them based on kind of the property, the interest level, and what's important to the seller. And sometimes you literally have to do all of these things. And so we did all of these things that I just mentioned. And then they came back to us and said, hey, there's another competing offer. It's a cash deal. So the only way that my seller feels comfortable going with your client is for you to waive the appraisal in general. Basically saying that you cannot have a contingent offer based on the appraisal of the contract. So for example, in that same instance, property goes under contract at 615, but for some reason the property comes in short at 585 or 600,000, you cannot terminate that contract based on the low appraisal. And so for a lot of people, they can't come up with the additional $15,000 to $25,000 or $30,000, and that could put them in a really, really bad place. And you could be in breach of contract should you not be able to actually perform on you dropping the appraisal contingency. So that is very, very last case scenario. I've maybe had 3 or 4 people do that in my career. It is required in a lot of situations, and if you have a little cash liquid and you're not too concerned about it, or maybe there's enough supporting comps where even though you know it's a risk, but it's maybe a little bit less of a risk, well then maybe we'll make a decision together and I'll give you the details and you as the buyer can make that financial business decision to see if that makes sense for you. So that sums up some of the different levers that we can work with when we're strategizing an offer on the property that you're looking for. So I hope this has been helpful. This is something that is just required in today's market. So if you're going about this alone, obviously that's confusing. You're not going to know how to pull on all these different strings. And so there's a few other things that I didn't mention in this video, such as escalation clauses and different things like that will help position your offer in the eyes of the seller to be the best one to get you the property that you really want. And lastly, I do have a free bi-weekly newsletter I send out. So if you just want to familiarize yourself kind of with Chicago, things that are going on, different news articles in the city, well, that newsletter will be sent to you for free. So just click the link down in the description, sign up for the newsletter, no obligations. You can unsubscribe anytime. And that'll be a good way for you to kind of dip your feet in and get your feet wet for buying a property here in the Chicago real estate market. If this has been valuable, please do us a favor, like the video, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, check out some of these other videos talking about Chicago real estate, and I hope to see you on the next video. So thank you so much for being here. We'll see you on the next video. Peace.